Bible is just about as long as it is possible for any document to be.
For fuck's sake!
They want to go ahead and they want to take this idea and talk about that as if it's real, as if that's what's real.
This is insane. Look at this vastness.
Hello and welcome to the Lion Go Show, June 23rd, 2013. And today's topic is education. And today we have Eric Cernya, Wit, and Hogtie Champ. You guys can unmute.
Hello!
Hello.
How do you pronounce your last name, Eric?
You got it pretty close. Cernyar.
What is that? It's
Croatian.
Oh. And Hogtie's still not with us. But, so you were a part of the Good News Club as a child, I was heard.
Yeah, I attended Good News Clubs from about the ages of 5 through 10 as a child. And they're still very much the same today as they were back then. There's a really heavy emphasis on sin and your depraved human nature and health, and how you must basically accept this very conservative evangelical view of salvation in order to be saved. So, for example, if you believe that there are other ways for someone to go to heaven, well, then you yourself cannot go to heaven. You have to believe that Christ is the only way. And that's one of the prerequisites to get saved.
Do you have to be baptized? Like, is there
interpretation.
any, requirements? Like, how do you get into it?
Oh, how do you get into it? People, today, you get invitations from your classmates, and they send permission slips home in students' backpacks, and the parents sign them and send their kids to these after-school programs. Earlier, back when I was a child, they were doing this in people's homes and backyards, and sometimes community centers. And so, if, sometimes you'd carpool there, or your parents would take you there.
Yeah, so just to be clear, it's an after-school program, just like any other club, basically, right? Like a chess club or something for grade schoolers, though.
Well, it's not just like any other club, because
not in concept. No.
It has. Right, but it does occur after school. But it's a very structured form of indoctrination.
It's kind of like the Boy Scouts.
So it doesn't have that participatory back and forth type learning that you might in other after school clubs.
Well, so
it's purely didactic.
So who takes the position of or who takes the role of leader, so to speak, of this club? Is it a student kind of or run club, or is it
an adult?
What?
It's an adult-directed club, and
It's
typically
not?
there will be several adults involved.
You said it's not an adult-directed club?
No, it is an adult-directed club. Sometimes they'll have high school students and homeschooled teenagers come and teach parts of the club as well.
Homeschooled? Wait, so this is not just a public school thing, it's a private thing?
Well, it's at public schools, but they often recruit teenagers that are homeschooled to teach the clubs.
Yeah, he's talking about the directors of the club, the people who run them. Sometimes they recruit adults, in other words, some maybe after school.
Sometimes they
people.
recruit adults and sometimes homeschool teenagers. And they go in and they run the club or they teach the club, teach the lessons. But part of the structure is this. In order to be a Good News Club teacher, you have to go through their training program. And they teach, they basically program these teachers to follow this very basic wordless book formula for salvation. So first you have to talk about how each child is born in sin, commits sin, deserves death and hell because of that sin. That's black. That's the color black. Then they go to red about Jesus dying on the cross, and he's the only way that people can be saved. And God sent Jesus to die to take the punishment for these children's sins. And then by accepting all of these theological beliefs, believing them and confessing, then you can be saved, and that's the color white. And as a result, you can enjoy the benefits of heaven when you die. And they teach the teachers to follow this program. They have very, very detailed curriculums for them to follow. And they actually grade the teachers on how well they hit on each of these topical points.
What do you mean by grade?
So if you, for example, you just talk about sin by itself, that's not enough. You have to talk about how the child was born with a sinful nature as well in order to get full credit for hitting on all the major points they want you to hit on.
Yeah, I mean, it's standard Christian doctrine. I mean, so would we all agree, though, from the outset that at least there's no legal issue here? I mean, there's no problem in that sense of this club. Would you agree to that? I mean, that they have every right to have this kind of club. Would we at least agree on that?
I would agree that based upon existing Supreme Court doctrine, they have a free speech and equal right to go into schools and do this. However, the courts have never considered whether or not a club or anybody can just come into a public school and have a program that is emotionally and psychologically abusive. They've never tested that theory. And there's certainly legitimate concerns can be raised about what the club teaches children. To go into a public school and tell children ages 5 to 12 that they deserve to die is not appropriate. But that has never been tested in court.
Well,
no one has brought it up.
Yeah, but hold on. The kids do voluntarily join these clubs. They're not. Nobody's making them do it.
Well, actually, you have to get
For
a
the
note from your
parents,
teacher.
maybe.
I've read.
Well, no, but the
parents
permission slip would have to include the child's own consent, wouldn't it?
No,
Not
it wouldn't.
exactly.
It just requires the parents' consent.
Well,
The children don't have any rights of the speakers and not the rights of the children. So we have this paradigm in America where we only look at the adult speakers' rights and maybe the parents' rights. But the children don't have any voice in this at all. And it's not appropriate for a child to be told in a public school that they deserve to die because of who they are. It's not appropriate even if their parents signed the permission slip.
Well, okay.
This is emotional and psychological abuse happening in the public schools. And
Yeah,
at
but I
least
don't
in the
see
public schools, they should be a sanctuary from this kind of abuse.
Well, hold on though. I don't.
Wait. Let Hogtie go. He isn't.
All right. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to clarify, because you're saying sort of two things. It's a compound assertion. You're saying that they shouldn't be told, these things, and you list several things, and then you say in a public school. So what is your concern? Is it those things are the issue, and it's bad that we're telling those kids things? or is your issue that, like, would it be fair to say in your position that it would be okay that they're told these things, but as long as it's a different context than, say, a public school?
Well, I don't think it's appropriate in any context, but that's not a position that I can sell politically. So I think that we should start with the public schools and get this kind of pernicious indoctrination out of the public schools on the basis that public schools don't have to give equal free speech rights to groups that would come in and emotionally abuse children.
No, wait a minute. Let me
It doesn't have to be that way.
But let me follow up on Hogtie's point. The fact that it happens to be located, these meetings, in a public school, to me seems completely inconsequential, unless it would happen
totally
during
legal.
school hours on taxpayer money. But the fact that it's not,
it's very legally consequential
what does it matter?
from this point of view.
But in other words, if you wouldn't be saying that, say, a church, a Sunday school church, doesn't have the right or shouldn't be. I mean, morally, you could say yes. You could disagree morally, but I don't think you'd say churches. Sunday. You wouldn't be saying the same thing about a Sunday school church. I don't think. So the fact that it just happens to be located inside of a public school, what does it matter? I mean, that it doesn't matter.
Well, it matters legally. It matters legally because the entire Good News Club versus Milford decision from the Supreme Court in 2001 is founded on the notion of public forum doctrine. And under public forum doctrine, you have, it involves the right of governments to regulate speech on public property. You have public forums that are completely public or traditional public forums, for example, parks and sidewalks, where we have traditionally recognized very, very broad free speech rights.
Exactly.
Then we have limited public forums, and in a limited public forum, such as at a public school, a public school does not, in fact, today public schools typically are not open to absolutely any kind of use. Usually, and in most facility use policies, those uses have to be tied or limited to some purpose like education or youth programs. It's not just open to anybody just to come in whenever they want.
Of course,
or even after
classified
school
as
hours.
a program. They would classify it as Christian education.
Yes, that's right.
If I may,
they would. Go ahead.
What I was, I'm sorry. I'm Don Curry. I've been on here before. I'm the Christian side of the perspective, but I'm not the fundamental Christian side of the perspective. I'm a free thinker. I think for myself, and I'll tell you what I think is unfair. And this is just from a non-biased perspective, is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If you're going to have groups that spew whatever they want to spew, why shouldn't the Christians have the same thing? Do you get my drift?
Give me some examples about how the non-Christians are doing that.
For an example, my son's school, before he left it, they had an atheist, it's called, give me a second, I think the name of it, it's AA, it's a Atheist Association. It was an atheist group started by students, started by a teacher who it morphed into the students running the group. And they banned the Christian group for having to be able to do the exact same thing that the atheists are doing, the exact same thing. How is that fair? What's good for the goose is good for the gander, in my opinion.
Well, I agree. I actually completely agree with you, Donald. And if we have facility use policies that protect children from emotional and psychological abuse, it doesn't matter whether it's an atheist, a Nazi, a communist, or a Christian coming in, it should not be permitted. But it should be applied equally across the board.
Yeah, but you're
for
lifting
elementary public school children.
You're carrying a
We're
really
not
heavy
talking
burden
about
there.
student-directed clubs.
Yeah, but who's to say what will inflict psychological damage? I mean, I could be psychologically damaged by a lot of things. How do you calculate that out? Which I mean,
Well,
there's a lot of people who could equally say the same thing about any atheist club or any religious club.
Well, granted, but
Should we therefore get rid of all atheists and religious clubs?
No, that's ridiculous. The vagueness or the imprecision in trying to forecast what might cause damage is in no way an excuse to just not bother, right? I mean, if someone is going to put forward the case, the concern that there's a club or an activity that is harmful in some way, then that's got to be assessed as best it can. You can't, I mean, I don't even believe that you hold that position. You can just shrug your shoulders and go, oh, well, who knows what causes harm, so screw it. We'll let the Christians do that. We'll let the atheists do that. Hell, we'll let NAMBLA in because we can't tell what really harms people. That's ridiculous.
Give it time.
Yeah, but no, but it's
going to be that way.
It's not just that, but
it's equally absurd.
Hold on one second. There's a whole field of science. It's called psychology, and it's not a perfect and precise science, but we shouldn't just pretend it doesn't exist. And they have come up with several categories and red flag signs of emotional and psychological abuse. For example, degrading, rejecting, terrorizing, ignoring, isolating, corrupting, and exploiting. So we can look at various factors and we can make an evaluation of whether some group curriculum is violating that. And you know what's going to happen? If a school starts to do this to CEF's curriculum, they're probably going to change it. That's probably what they're going to do. Or it's going to generate a lot of public attention, and evangelicals are going to be on the defensive about supporting such a harsh form of indoctrination that can really drive children into horrible views of themselves.
Well, let
me put it this way. I grew up in evangelicalism, and I got to tell you what I experienced. Hell is for children, and grace is for their parents. And that's the outrage, because in most of these churches that are going out and supporting good news clubs and teaching children hell on a lesson-by-lesson basis would never survive if they did that in their main church service for adults every Sunday. Why do children get such a severe form of Christianity, but then it's all about grace and love for the parents?
Well, let me be clear. I think we can all probably equally agree at the moral outrage of what's happening. But are you actually arguing that there's a legal case here, that they shouldn't be legally allowed to have this club because of said psychological abuse? And are there cases of this psychological abuse from such clubs?
There is a legal case to be made if and when a public school enacts some of these provisions. Right now, most public schools have fairly open-ended facility use policies. They may list categories like education and youth groups and things like that, but they don't limit groups on the basis of any kind of abusive conduct toward children. However, you will find quite often in many facility use policies prohibitions against advocating the overthrow of the U.S. government or sedition or things like that. These are holdovers from the 1950s communist era, and these provisions are still in, or the communist scare of the 1950s. These provisions are still in many facility use policies. Now we need to add to them provisions about protecting the youngest of our children, and I'm not talking about high school students. I completely believe that high school students ought to have the right and freedom, as they do under the Equal Access Act, to form Bible clubs. I don't care how fundamentalist they are, because it's student-led. But for adults to come in and give this to children who are too young to lead such a group, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with it happening in our public schools. I think what we've lost in our country is an appreciation the value of public education, of the civic mindedness that it develops, and by saying that schools can't be sanctuaries for developing those civic values.
Wait, can I
Really to
ask,
throw out one of the primary purposes of public education.
well, can I ask, maybe to clarify, because can you tell me exactly what is the problem with it happening on the location of school grounds? Because, I mean, as far as what explicitly is the problem with that? Since, as far as I can see, after school hours, it ceases to be it just is a building after that. So, what exactly is the problem with this happening in a school?
Okay.
After
So
hours?
if it happened in a church or in a Sunday school,
Yes.
churches and Sunday schools would be protected by the whole doctrine of ecclesiastical abstention or church autonomy. So the government couldn't go in and raid a church or shut down church's doors for teaching children this kind of stuff. But the government can limit and define the parameters of the use of its own public property. It doesn't have to allow its public property to be turned into a church.
So, well, hold on though, but because you mentioned earlier that these clubs were sometimes held in backyards, or it may have started off that way. So if it wasn't held on school grounds, it would be okay then, or relatively, that.
Yeah, there wouldn't. I'll put it this way: there wouldn't be any legal basis for trying to stop it on private property or church property. There wouldn't be any basis.
Yeah, so it's just merely the fact that it's a public building.
Well, you can't say merely, because it's still a compound issue. It is a public building, and it's the fact that public property can be limited to specific types of uses. It doesn't have to be open up to everything, unless it's a traditional public forum, such as a park.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody would argue it should be open to everything. But I think the burden of proof would be on someone who says that there is a grave concern with, say, this type of club, to demonstrate that there's grounds for some kind of concern, that there's some evidence that people are being psychologically abused in this type of club. Because otherwise, religious type of clubs after school are a dime a dozen. And I generally don't have any problem with.
Well, they're not a dime a dozen for elementary.
True. Yeah. Okay.
Schools. They're definitely a dime a dozen high school.
Yeah. That's true.
In fact, I started a high school Bible study club myself when I was a junior in high school.
But even still, I don't think intrinsically the young age makes any difference to me. Anyways, I have no problem with that either.
That the age of the child doesn't matter? So you don't think that there's any differences in development with a 5-year-old versus a 12-year-old? No, wait a second. This is a crazy thing, because when you're an adult, you can abstract things away. You might hear about hell, and you're going to abstract that away and think, well, it just really means separation from God, and it doesn't, so you're not really accepting the gravity of being burned to death. But when you're 5, you're not going to be able to abstract it away that way.
Yeah,
children don't have the power of abstract.
What I'm assuming in my claim is that it's voluntary for the child. You seem to be suggesting that these children are forced into it, which I don't know. It sounds.
No, I'm not saying they're forced into it by anybody other than their own parents. But the parents are quite often not even informed about the content of it. The children themselves are not in a position to judge whether or not this is appropriate for them. You could set up a porn club at a public school, and a lot of children might not know that, this is inappropriate. They might just go and think it's great.
If I may?
Go ahead, Donald.
Yeah.
See, my two perspectives of it is this, is that, I don't think anything of that nature at an elementary level should ever be interjected into the curriculum. okay, of any kind, religious, non-religious, what have you. Because, it's just like the back east. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to watch the videos again to find out the states. But it's like after the Sandy Hook incident that happened, there was like 4 or 5 kids that got suspended from school for, one kid was chewing up a Pop-Tart, trying to make it in the shape of a mountain, but looked like a gun. He got suspended for that. Another kid got suspended for having a Lego-shaped gun. Another kid pretended to throw an imaginary grenade. He got suspended for that. And these are all kindergarten kids. Those kids don't even know what the hell they're doing. They're just being kids. And when we're talking about the psychological damage to the elementary kids, some of them have no, like you said, have no grasp that it's inappropriate or appropriate. But when it comes to brainwashing the children in public schools, it's bad enough that they're teaching sex ed in first grade. They shouldn't have that until junior high. Okay, so the argument that what's right and what's wrong, what should be right and wrong is their mental levels. Don't imagine that there's some kind of genius that can comprehend what's going on. If I'm being clear, I hope I am, but the point I'm trying to make is that you've got the discussion talking about the good news people. If you're talking about on an elementary level, some of them have already been in church. They're not at the point of distaste for religion as much as you would be in, say, junior high and high school, because you really don't understand what the problem is, why people are up in arms about being against religion or not against religion, and why adults are always arguing about how religion is such a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. I'll tell you from my own experience. I was not taught brimstone and fire. That's why I despise brimstone and fire teachings. And that's a minority compared to what I was taught in, which was the majority. And it was not taught that, not denying that shit happened in the Bible that was bad. There's no denying that. But I choose, and I know this is where a lot of atheists get up in arms about, is that I choose to be a cherry picker because I don't like dwelling on the negative, and that's what the problem is. We dwell on the negative so much that people think that they're right because there's a handful of things in the Bible that are negative. Well, what about the stuff that we're taught to be good to one another? That's not just a religious thing. But people dismiss that part of it because they would rather pick the negatives than the positives. And that's just my 2 cents.
Hogtie, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yep.
You have anything to say?
Well, I think Don is going to take us on a bit of a journey. I did kind of start to wonder what Donnie envisions or imagines would take place in a sex ed classroom for grade 1 kids.
I've been there. I know exactly what happens. 4 times this time.
You've been... I don't know if we should embark on this because it sort of takes us off the Good News Club thing, which I think we do have a pretty vibrant discussion going on that. Maybe we should put a pin in that and talk about it another time. It's interesting. I had a good thought a moment ago, but it kind of slipped away here. Someone else grab the mic here.
Well, you know what I feel? I feel like in general, the kind of general idea that's being thrown around is that we need to kind of shield kids from these ideas. And that because, there's this potential harm that it could psychologically damage them. And I'm not saying, like you said earlier, Hogtie, that I'm saying, oh, well, how can we determine what's psychologically damaged? Of course, we know certain things are. What I'm saying is you're going to have a very heavy burden. I mean, you can say that same thing about a lot of different things. You can be psychologically damaged by a lot of things. I mean, and it just seems kind of arbitrary to me. I mean, I don't think we need to shield kids as much as...
Speaking of burden, when it talks about burden, I mean, what I propose, and I propose facility use policy and child protective provisions that should go into facility use policies. And I go through many of these different factors that the field of psychology has developed over the last few decades dealing with emotional and psychological abuse. And so I recommend that schools weigh these various factors. There's other things that they could also do, but besides weighing actual psychological harm factors, they could require that any club that comes in publicly disclose their curriculum, which is something that CEF does not do. You have to go and spend a couple $100 to buy the curriculum if you want to know what they're teaching. It ought to be made completely public so that parents can see exactly what their children are being taught without having to sit in on each club.
Yeah,
and that should be done for every club.
I would agree with that, but what I'm cautioning though is, I guess, I feel like the same argument could be, and has been made actually, from the other side, from the other angle. There was the Texas Republicans, a lot of them, or all of them, I don't remember, but a vast majority of them signed this pledge for a public school, like pledging that it was, I forget exactly what it was, but one of the points in the pledge that these Republicans signed onto was to they're explicitly against the teaching of critical thinking skills for the exact reason that it may shake some kids' foundational beliefs and totally like throw them for a, psychological loop and open up this world of, devious behavior, et cetera, and that, I feel like this is a kind of, I don't know.
Well, let me take this into a slightly different legal direction. We have this entire body of law called student speech law. The legal distinction here is that it applies to student speech. A lot of it's on campus, but a growing body of cases involves off-campus speech by students. And the Supreme Court held in one case, this happened in 2007, that a group of high school students that held a banner that said "Bong Hits for Jesus" were rightly disciplined and suspended for promoting drug use, for holding that banner across the street from the school when the Olympic torch was running by. Well, that didn't happen in 2007. The decision happened in 2007. I think it was the 2000 Olympic torch. And then you have another case a bit older. It's called the Frazier case. And there, a high school student gave a nominating speech for a fellow student where he used sexual innuendo. It was actually quite mild by today's standards. Like, for example, this guy is very firm in the pants, talking about how firm his convictions were. And the Supreme Court was absolutely aghast. If you read their opinion, they use words like obscene, vulgar, about 15 times in the opinion. They're just absolutely aghast because back then, most of these Supreme Court justices are dead now that ruled in that 1986 decision, and they were completely aghast by sexual innuendo. Totally aghast. It was horrible, and the schools had every right to discipline the high school student that made that nominating speech. That's still good law. Frazier is still good law. The Bong Hits for Jesus is still good law. And recently, the courts or the various circuits have split over whether or not schools have a right to discipline students for online degrading attacks on fellow students. And about half the circuits have held that they can discipline students for that, and about half of them have held that they can't. So there's a real constitutional First Amendment dispute over that. So here's the thing. We already have a situation where student speech itself is somewhat limited. You can't debase and degrade fellow students and expect not to be disciplined for it in the classroom or on the playground, or between the bell and sometimes even after the bell. Yeah, you can't do it on the bus ride home. And we have a situation now where students don't have that right, but adults do. They can come in and they can tell children the kinds of things we've been talking about without any kind of consequence at all. And that's a pretty interesting
Wait, what do you mean
situation that we have.
Adults don't have unlimited rights to just enter schools and say whatever, do whatever they want.
Well,
Yeah,
they do with the
approved by the school board.
Except the Good News Club can come in and tell children they deserve to die.
But see, I feel like the real issue is, one, an issue of consent, that you're saying a lot of these kids don't even have a choice. Because I would argue, if they want to do it, I don't really see any problem, even morally. If that's what they want to do, I don't see the problem. But then the other issue is, you're saying they kind of are, they're not allowing their curriculum to be publicly known, that you have to pay money to even see that. And so the two things in my mind, that it's not religion per se, but it's the fact that the child has no consent, it's not voluntary, and the fact that they're actually deceiving people in a sense, that they don't even know, they're not getting what they were expecting out of it. And so that's really the problem. It's not necessarily that they're telling kids they are going to die is per se the actual problem.
Yeah, I think you're getting closer to the bullseye there, in the sense that I think this whole Good News Club issue unfortunately gets painted as a religion versus non-religion or irreligion, whatever you want to call it, as a religion versus non-religion issue. And I know when I had first heard about this, one of the first things I heard was people saying, well, they just shouldn't be allowed on school grounds anyway, because the First Amendment says separation of church and state, revealing a shocking misunderstanding, because in these circumstances, the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause, actually provides protection for for example, Christian groups that would serve to set up a Christian club in a public school, right? Because, and I'm going to explain this just for some people here may completely understand this, but I just want to be perfectly clear on this issue, that because that the Americans here would be striving to keep church and state separate, that is, that the state is not making decisions about the content of speech, like, oh, well, you can't tell people that Joseph Smith actually read the gold plates out of the hat, because the government, we don't believe that, so, you're not allowed to say that. But you can tell people, for example, that Jesus died on the cross, because we do believe that. That there's no place should the government ever be in the position of adjudicating religious and spiritual claims. So as soon as you start saying, okay, well, we're going to keep this space open for these school clubs, and we're going to let the badminton club come in, and we're going to let the chess club come in, but, oh, these people want to come in and talk about how Christ died for our sins. Well, we don't want them, right? That would be a violation of the First Amendment. So when you discuss the Good News Club on those grounds alone, where you present the Good News Club as, well, they wanted to come in and talk about their Christian stuff, and then these schools, people got upset about it, and then this one school said, well, forget it, you can't come in, so they had to sue to get the right to come into the school, then they're the good guys, and I would side with them. But the last thing you said, I think, is closer to the mark. I think that this notion of limited public forum is a very strong and important notion, because the schools should have the right to say these groups are acceptable, those groups aren't acceptable. They don't just throw the doors open after hours and anybody can come in. Like I say, NAMBLA, for example, can't set up in a school. The groups have to come in with a theme that is consistent, or at the very least not inconsistent, with the sense of scholarship and good development that's supposed to go on in the school. And the fact that that any group would come in, like, let's suppose, like, would anybody on the panel here support the KKK or not the KKK, just any white supremacy group to come in and say, hey, well, we're going to have a club, and it's totally voluntary. Only kids who want to be in this club can join the club. And we're going to talk about how the Jews are ruining the world and how black people should all be shipped off somewhere or left to die somewhere, and that's just what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Is that not something that everybody would very clearly object to?
I would.
So I think. Hello, who is that?
Free speech. I mean, it's
Yeah.
free speech.
Well, hold on though.
No. And
Well,
you must
look,
be kidding.
There's a difference,
between.
there's a difference between free speech and school policy, like what Eric was saying earlier. You know, schools have the right to enforce certain policies and discipline their students in various ways, but that's not to say the kids don't still have free speech. They, of course, I mean, free speech is a legal issue. Like, will you get arrested for saying something like that? Of course you won't, but the school has every right to discipline you as a voluntary member of that school.
Okay, then in the case of a Florida high school history teacher who...
So those are two different issues.
Okay, but in the case of a Florida high school history teacher who posted something on his Facebook about how he thinks gay marriage is wrong and he got fired, do you think that was justified?
Well, it's not a violation of free speech. It's a violation of, say, the school's policy, perhaps, that they didn't want that was part of his contract or something that he signed, that he wouldn't be publicly demeaning people or something.
Yeah, and I think we're gravely miscoloring the
real life examples. Would you like some real life examples here? Because while we don't have very many examples on the white supremacy thing outside of, say, wearing a Confederate flag, and actually there's probably half a dozen Confederate flag cases. But when it comes to the Day of Truth campaign and the Day of Silence campaign, have you heard of that? Day of Silence for gays and lesbians. A gay and lesbian student group that's nationwide started a Day of Silence campaign where people would
I've heard
silent.
of that. Yes.
Yeah, to show their solidarity for gay rights. And so after one of these events, a Christian high school student somewhere in the Ninth Circuit, maybe California, I'm not sure which state, wore a shirt that said, "Be ashamed. Our school embraced what God has condemned." And then on the other side of the shirt, it said, "Homosexuality is shameful." Romans 1:27.
Yeah.
And that went up to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit held that the school was right in preventing him from wearing that shirt.
Okay, now.
And
yeah, it's both.
The Supreme Court actually granted cert, and then because the case became moot on a technicality, they didn't actually hear it. But it generated a tremendous amount of publicity. And then there was another case out of the Seventh Circuit just a few years ago where a student wanted to wear "Be Happy, Not Gay." And the Seventh Circuit basically made a distinction saying, well, if you wear, a shirt that says homosexuals are going to hell, or blacks have lower IQs, that would be a problem, and the school could prevent that. But "Be Happy, Not Gay" was not sufficiently antagonistic to justify the prohibition. So the courts themselves have been trying to draw these lines. It's actually very arbitrary. Quite often the courts just have to draw a line, and that's where they've drawn them so far.
If I may.
But again, that's not a free speech issue. That's just simply a school enforcing its own policies.
But where do you draw the line?
No, still is
Where do you draw the line?
issue because
The law, you can draw the line at arrest. If the school is going to have you arrested for saying that, then that's a violation of your freedom of speech.
But
Punished by a school that you're volunteering.
Treat this as a free speech issue, but the rights of the students are more limited than those of adults, and that's Supreme Court doctrine. I don't know why that is, but it is.
Not their rights of free speech, though.
Yes, actually that's Supreme Court doctrine, that students don't have all of the rights of adults when it comes to First Amendment rights. I'm not sure I agree with that, but that is Supreme Court doctrine.
And we need to understand, too, that is also not necessarily that particular ruling, but when we're talking about free speech, we're not talking about I mean, free speech is a guarantee of it's a guarantee of protection from barriers against your speech, so that the government can't make certain types of speech illegal. It is not a guarantee of a forum for your speech. The public, can't put me in jail for me expressing my opinion about Jesus or about black people or whatever else. But the public also does not need to cobble together my soapbox, right? I have no right to go into the schools and demand that my so-called free speech is permitted in schools. I think that's really the issue here. I think free speech is a bit of a misunderstanding, thinking that it just has to be given like in schools. That's crazy.
Excellent point.
If I may,
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a point. The biggest argument here is not really the line between religion and non-religion, but more so, what are we really arguing about? Are we arguing the fact that the schools are allowing this stuff to happen in the school, or that the fact that someone brought up the fact that the good news is allowed to come into the school? Well, ultimately, it's the administrators and the people that run the schools that allow this to happen. See, I'm not one of those type of Christians that likes the whole, forcing the religion on other people. But I think what's fair is fair. If you're going to have one, you're going to have the other.
Exactly.
When it comes
you're hitting the nail on the head here. Let me, and that, because I want to jump in on this, because you're talking about the school allowing the Good News Club into the schools. I don't have a problem with the school administrators allowing the Good News Club to come into the schools. They don't have a choice. That's the problem. The Good News Clubs are muscling the ways into the schools. If you don't let them in, and there's at least 2 well-documented cases of a school saying, no thank you, you guys have a bad reputation for stirring up problems and making this an adversarial, vicious environment for the children. Thank you, no, you're not welcome to be here. And they sued into the school. There's another case where they said, well, if you want to do that, we've got a chapel or like a religious facility on campus, but no, you can't come into the school. And they say, yeah, we'll take a look at this courtroom. You guys are screwed if you don't let us in. It's not up to the administrators to allow them in. They are being bullied into allowing them in. And that's the thing that's upsetting.
Is that true?
Hogtie, do you think that, what if there was a neo-pagan club started at the school? I mean, and the school allowed that to happen. Would that be bad or not?
I would say, just responding because it was directed to me, is that I would say that the school administrators have a mandate to do the best for the children. So they have to make decisions in this instance, we're talking about establishing regulations related to after-school property use and enforcing those regulations. And they are enjoined, they have this mandate that says they have to do what's best for those kids. But because they are representative of a governmental body, they're a public body, they have one very important limitation, and that is, you go ahead and you make your decisions on whatever basis you need to make those decisions to do it for these kids. But under no circumstances should you make a decision based on the truth of religious claims, right? So they're not allowed to say, okay, well, the Christians can come in. Well, not all the Christians. I mean, we're going to allow the Protestants, but not the Mormons or the Catholics. And the Muslims definitely can't come in, and forget the pagans, right? They're not allowed to do those kind of things. So your question is, well, what if the pagans are doing the same things? If the pagans were doing things that were this disruptive to the harmony in the educational environment, I would say absolutely those administrators should throw them out for that reason, not because they're pagan.
Oh, well, okay, but the problem is many of the school administrators are biased. That's the problem, because this has actually happened where they stopped it originally, but then some Christian parents reacted and said they're trying to get daughter out of school, so they continued. And then some pagans from the Unitarian Universalist Church started distributing stuff in schools, and the kids were taking it home. And the parents said, we need to stop this. We have to get God back in schools. And it's like, that's exactly what we just did. So the problem is they're biased, especially in the southern states.
Well, I do think that's a significant problem, and that's why I was saying before. And I think I heard some agreement from other people on the panel that that the problem is that okay, that we'll play out the headlines kind of in the order they come, right? Christian group comes to school, and some kids are up for this. Their parents sign the consents. Great. Hey, we have a good news club. That's awesome. And then it turns out there's some bad stuff being said about them, and now this school doesn't want to allow them in. And so now the story is, well, Christian club is not allowed in or gets thrown out. And then Christians who don't necessarily know the nature of the allegations against the Good News Club are like, yep, here we go again. It's another attack on Christianity. Jesus said we would be hated the way he was hated. So they'll come to the defense of the Good News Club on the grounds of it's yet another case of Christian persecution. And it sort of misses the point of what the problem is.
Well, there are First Amendment radicals. I mean, there are people who take it too far. I don't know if you saw this, but there was this 5-year-old who wasn't allowed to sing a song about Jesus at the talent show. I mean, sometimes I think people take it a little too far. I mean, I agree with, taking forced prayer out of schools and things like that, which is not really a problem because you can still pray in school. But I mean, saying a 5-year-old can't sing or in a Christian song in a talent show or graduation speech, for example, you can't mention. I don't mind if someone mentions God in a graduation speech as long as they don't preach and give us an entire sermon. Thanking God in a graduation speech is not an issue to me. And neither is a 5-year-old singing a song about Jesus.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I do think there are a number of people who've completely lost their minds with regard to the First Amendment and the Establishment Clause when they think that the Establishment Clause is a barrier or a prohibition to religious expression in schools, because it's absolutely not. It is, as I've said repeatedly, it is merely a prohibition against public administrators making decisions about the veracity of religious claims. And I know when I hear somebody say, oh, they're making prayer, they're banning prayer from school, and I roll my eyes because, 9 times out of 10, I picked that number arbitrarily, I admit, but 9 times out of 10 when somebody says, oh, they're banning prayer from school, what they're doing is they're withdrawing the forced prayer. When I went to school, we said the Lord's Prayer every morning, in English and in French, and occasionally in Ukrainian. And then later, you got to know where I'm from. With the short version, look up the history of the homesteaders in Western Canada. My community, they would say, is half Indian, that is native. We used to say half Indian, half French, half Ukrainian, and the rest are white. We don't say that much anymore. I think it's unrefined. But we had. I mean, the Lord's Prayer was a very important part of our day in public school, and then we did get to a point. I mean, there's certainly been changes. This is a very rural community, and it's gotten more progressive in the sense. And keep in mind too, this is in Canada before the adoption of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we are. And I understand, I don't mean to derail this, because I understand the discussion we're having with regard to the Good News Club is in the context of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And so I'm just making clear here that my culture and community and everything are completely separate from that. We don't have such a thing. We just have secular governance. So there is no prohibition against prayer in school, even if they wanted to have sort of class prayers. Now that we have school to impose prayer on all students. But in any case, getting back to the American example, you'd hear, oh, they're banning prayer in school. No, they told the teachers to stop holding prayer sessions in the mornings. That's the ban. But there is the one time in 10 where it's like, oh, well, there were these kids that used to bow their heads and pray before they had lunch. And then the teachers would come over and say, no, you're not allowed to do that. And you go, no, that's crazy. You cannot stop people from expressing their religiosity So your point, and I'm just agreeing with you sort of vigorously here, that if there's a kid that wants to sing a religious song at the Christmas pageant, then that's fine, put it on. I mean, the thing you're going to have to deal with then is what happens when, a Jewish kid or a Muslim wants to do something that honors their faith. You cannot say, well, we're going to allow the Christians, but not the Muslims, and not the Jews, and not the pagans, and certainly not the Mormons. You can't start doing things like that as a public body. However, I think what this whole issue comes down to, and I think the real loser in this whole battle, when we start talking about these rights, I mean, people talk about free speech, but the whole principle of free speech is so misapplied when you're talking about giving people a soapbox in a public school, because you have the freedom, but you don't have the paved road, right? They don't set it up so that you can say these things.
Well, another way of saying that is you have the legal right, but you don't have the right to do that without consequences of a school that you are a member of.
No, you don't have the right. I would say
you
that's
have the legal right. You can legally stand there and preach all you want. You're not going to get arrested or any criminal charges pressed against you for doing so.
Sure,
you may get disciplined by the school.
Yeah, you could be deemed to be trespassing. To say that you have a right.
Oh, well, then that's
that
not free speech, though.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. Is that the whole notion of free speech in a limited public forum or on private property is misapplied, right? Like, I mean, you can. I mean, is it fair to say that I have the right to express my opinion in your living room, right?
Legally,
and
yes.
No, I don't. No, I don't know. All we're doing in our disagreement, in this particular point of disagreement, I think it's only disagreement over what we each mean by the word right. I think you're arguing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're arguing that people have the freedom of conscience, that
no. What I'm saying is all I'm saying is you cannot, criminal charges cannot be brought against for saying something in someone's living room.
Yes, they could be and should be.
Maybe
criminal charges somebody has a right
against you for maybe trespassing, but that has nothing to do with the content of what you said.
Right. No. That's what I'm saying. You would not be brought down for the content of it.
Yeah, so it has nothing to do with freedom of speech. The whole issue has nothing to do with it.
Right, but you're going beyond that. You're saying that you have the right to say these things on someone else's property or in a public.
You have a right to free speech, and that applies no matter whether you're in a classroom or in someone's house.
Okay.
No, you don't.
I think
one at a time.
Okay, I think the thing is, right now, what it is you have a right to say what you want to say. The issue is where you're saying it. So you have a right to say it, but it's a matter of you don't have the right to say it on his property without his permission to say it. If you do not have his permission, he could ask you to leave his property. If you do not leave his property, if you do not leave his property as asked, you could be arrested for trespassing.
For trespassing, but not for saying something.
But that's the point. It's that you have the right to say it, but you do not have the right to say it on his property unless you have his permission.
No, I take your point, and I'm not saying that the sentiment behind it is wrong. I get what you're saying, that if there's people would not object and should not object to you holding an opinion. You shouldn't go and sort of selectively arrest people for expressing certain opinions and not arrest other people who express different opinions. What I'm taking exception with what you're saying, and I appreciate this is a bit semantic and I'm sort of picking at this one issue, but the statement that you have a right to say that is incorrect. A right means that the other party holds an obligation to you, right? So for example, if I own an apartment building and you're renting an apartment from me, I have a right to $1,000 piece of property. That is, the contract between us creates an obligation for each party to the other party. And so when you say that you have a right to speak in these schools, that's to say that the school has an obligation to create that platform.
Nope.
When I'm saying they definitely don't.
No, you're misplacing who the obligation is to there. In terms of rights, we're talking about legal. I mean, we could either be talking about legal rights or like institutional right, and maybe that's where the equivocation is happening. I'm talking strictly in the legal sense, and in that sense, our obligation is fulfilled by the government in that criminal charges can't be brought against us for saying something, insofar as it's not violent or intimidating, which is, that's not, that's like the one exception to free speech. But your legal free speech is the same regardless whether you're in a school or in somebody's home. I mean, yes, they have a right to ask you to leave, and if you don't, then that's an issue of trespassing or a school disciplining you, suspending you for cussing or something. That's not a free speech issue. That's an issue of a school acting out a certain policy, a disciplinary policy. That has nothing to do with the legal right to be able to say it and not be arrested.
I'm a lawyer, and I can tell you this: the law doesn't cleanly divide free speech issues into these kinds of categories. So it's more of a mix, and that's the way the law treats it. Student speech, for example, students don't leave their constitutional rights behind at the schoolhouse gate. However, their rights are more limited in the context of the public school than they are, say, at home.
But again, legal rights or school rights.
It's not that the First Amendment doesn't apply. It's just it doesn't apply equally everywhere.
No, but qualify what you meant by rights.
It just doesn't.
Are you talking legally, or
well, I'm just talking about what the law looks
how
at.
it will be disciplined? I mean, the school has a right to discipline.
The government doesn't. The severity of discipline, whether it's criminal or civil, is a factor. Courts do look at it. In the context of this particular discussion, we're not talking about criminalizing the Good News Club. We're just talking about whether or not they should be at public schools, and I would say this: if the school doesn't have any emotional or psychological criteria, then they're going to have an equal access right. But if they do have neutral, generally applicable, non-religious criteria that they apply equally to everybody, then the Good News Club might not be able to get in on the basis of that criteria. They might have to change. They wouldn't have to abandon Christian doctrine, but they might have to drop some of the severity or tone down the severity of the rhetoric. Things like that.
Actually, maybe that would sort of help guide the discussion a little bit too, because I think even from fairly early on in this episode, we've kind of gotten into a somewhat abstract discussion about, and I don't mean that's bad, that's good, I think that's necessary, about sort of what the rights are and well, what if, hypotheticals, what if this group did this or that group did that. But I wonder if maybe you can speak more to the issue about the doctrines and kind of specifically what's harmful about it and how they're being addressed in some of these schools.
Well, if we're talking about doctrines, the starting framework that the courts look at is the public forum doctrine. And so we've already discussed that to some extent, whether public schools would be like a park where anybody gets to come in on pretty much the same basis that somebody at a park would be able to protest or hold a demonstration. And the courts are in general agreement that the public schools don't fit into that category. It's a limited public forum where the court, where the government cannot discriminate on the basis of viewpoint, but they can discriminate on the basis of content if it's a reasonable distinction and it's related to the purpose of the forum. So if public schools, for example, could limit access to groups that are educational, but then we have the whole debate about what does educational mean. But they could try to carve it down further. They could limit it if they wanted to groups that simply taught evolution. They could. And that would exclude the chess club and every other club out there, and it would only be groups that teach evolution. That would possibly that would not be a viewpoint-based discrimination, but it would be content-based. And the big debate, for example, there would be whether or not that kind of a distinction or limitation is reasonably connected to the purpose of the forum. And that would be probably the weakest link of that hypothetical limitation.
Wait, Eric.
Go ahead.
I think, and I suspect you would think this too, that they would lose on those grounds.
For just evolution, whether it's reasonably related to the purpose of the forum, I don't know. Probably. I think it's a little bit difficult to justify just limiting it to that one particular purpose. On the other hand, courts really do look to see if there's some kind of political or ideological motivation behind a restriction. And if they perceive one, it's more likely that they will strike it down. It also depends on culture and context. I mean, if you're bashing gays or it's a Confederate flag, courts are more likely to uphold a limitation. So it's unlikely that in any public school you could have a white supremacist group or NAMBLA come in to a public school, because if NAMBLA or the white supremacist group challenged it, the courts would most likely side with the school. But part of that is because of culture. It's a little bit difficult to argue that it's based upon pure and consistently applied legal principles.
NAMBLA?
It's that our whole culture ignores those things.
NAMBLA?
Although strangely, they will allow as many anti-gay groups in as long as they come in under the banner of Christianity.
Well, I mean, where do you draw the line? That's the point I'm trying to make. I mean, if you have, for example, are you guys all familiar with Christian identity? Christian identity?
Is that a supremacist group?
Yeah, the white supremacists.
Yeah.
What if
they're out here in Colorado.
What if they came in? I mean, would that be allowed in the school? And what if the school said yes? I mean, would they face any legal action?
Well, if the school said yes, they wouldn't face any legal action. It's possible, and I would imagine that students and their parents sue the school for creating, a very hostile environment. I don't know where that would go. I mean, these are hypotheticals that just don't get tested outside of something like the Confederate flag, which is not nearly as bad as
if I may,
Christian identity.
If I may,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
You guys have touched on this a few times in this conversation, and I'd really like to put my 2 cents on it. The ultimate goal of this conversation, I'm guessing, is it fair or is it right to allow good news type people coming into the schools? I mean, the idea that the Confederate flag is a racist flag is ignorant, because the history of that flag has nothing to do with the KKK or any neo-Nazi organization. They have just mutated it into what we know now as a racist flag. Because my family has been in Georgia since 1710, okay? And it was there way before any of this racist crap happened. Meaning being represented by the KKK holding a flag. People now see the Confederate flag and think it's a racist flag. It has nothing to do with that, historically and literally. Okay, so on that, that's my 2 cents on that. Now, when it comes to the having certain organizations coming in and talking to the kids, I believe it was Strife that made the comment that, it is subjective at best what will offend you and what will not.
I don't think I said that.
Well, I'm paraphrasing. In other words, how do I know what's going to offend you?
Oh, I remember now, yeah.
Okay.
That was a while ago.
So being offended is subjective at best, because you don't know what's going to offend somebody. It could be me walking cross-legged across the street that would offend somebody, But when you have organizations like Good News comes in and and preaches the brimstone and fire, that's wrong. But if they're going in to, do a rally for religion, they should still have the right if you're going to allow other groups such as the gay and lesbian.
NAMBLA.
No, not NAMBLA. LGBT.
Yeah.
If you're going to allow one group to express their cause, don't make it not okay for another group just because they're religious. The LGBT wants to teach tolerance when it comes to homosexuality. Okay. Christians want tolerancy to believe in God. And I'm not speaking of the fundamentals. I'm talking about those that are like myself who just want to believe in God. If someone wants to know about it, they'll never be able to find out if they have questions because people want them out of the society's eyes. And they have to search out these people. So to me, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I always have said that, and I always will continue to say that. If you're going to have one group teaching tolerance, you need to have other groups that teach tolerance. Someone brought up the point about the pagan group being in the schools.
Yeah.
In my opinion, why not? If you're going to have a group that's a Bible study group, and you want to have, they already have schools that allow prayer time for Muslim kids. But they're going to kick out Christians out of the school, but allow the Muslims to pray at a certain time of their day on their rugs. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And it's not just on a religious level. I believe that for any group. If you're going to have one group...
And Donald, you're right. I agree with you. And you raised an important point about objective versus subjective criteria. So under First Amendment doctrine and public forum doctrine, even when the government is regulating a non-public or limited public forum, if they do establish some kind of content restrictions, it's important, and the courts will require that to the extent that an administrative official has some kind of discretion in issuing or denying a permit to use that forum, that there need to be objective and neutral and narrowly drawn criteria and standards for applying those criteria. So the courts are actually pretty strict when it comes to that. So when you talk about objective versus subjective, it wouldn't be sufficient. You couldn't have a facility use policy that just said no psychological or emotional abuse permitted. That's probably not specific enough.
Yeah, I'd like to address what you said. Sorry, you made the comment earlier in the chat where you were talking about how,
turn that down.
Turn
that. What is making that sound?
Someone else's background's got a train in the background.
It's Allison.
But I live right beside a train track.
Well, just mute your
mic.
So
do I. I'm just waiting for mine to come by. All right, but the point I was going to make is you brought up psychology and how psychiatrists can determine what's subjective or what's offensive and what's not. Well, and you did make the statement, and I thank you for making it, that it's not a perfect science, because it's not. They have therapists out there that believe that they can cure homosexuality. Okay? Non-religious psychiatrists believe they can cure homosexuality.
And it's abusive.
It is, but that's what I'm saying, is that I'd rather go by, I teach my kids that, you need to hear both sides.
Well, that's not definitely not generally accepted within the psychiatric community. There's no sound science behind that.
Yeah, I'll give you 10 minutes to find us a therapist or a clinic that is not religiously motivated who claims to cure homosexuality through psychotherapy or psychiatric methods.
Well, there's actually one from NYU, I'm pretty sure.
And there's one in
That's like-
Virginia Tech, too.
Yeah, but I don't buy it. That's all bullshit to me. I mean, there's no evidence at all that it's a disorder whatsoever. Talk to any psychologist or psychiatrist. There is
The point
no evidence.
The point I was making was that, you know, non-religious people are just as adamant against the homosexual tolerancy than there are religious.
No. I'm going to say... You've lost.
I would have to disagree with you because of the fact that I come across a lot of people who could care less about religion that have a complete distaste with homosexuality in their mouth, figuratively speaking. I'm not saying... Now, keep in mind, I lived
in Georgia before, too. I know what you're talking about.
You know, there are those, you know, I live in Reno, Nevada, so I get to interact with, during April, with a lot of gay people. And I lived in San Francisco for a year and a half. But even up until I moved to Florida, I was so homophobic that I thought the slightest grays caused AIDS. But I've educated myself. I've come to a whole different level of homosexuality issues.
Neither do infertile people.
You know, and, you know, the whole argument that, you know, just, you know, that's for another show, but, you know, the truth is that if you're going to have tolerance for one, you got to have tolerance for another, because if you don't, we will never advance as a society. We have, and to a certain level, we're talking about social tolerance. I'm not talking about illegal tolerance like NAMBLA. Okay? I'm talking about like the LGBT, the race issue, how people need to be tolerant with certain races, religious choices, non-religious choices, every facet of the society scale, you know, that's not illegal. Because NAMBLA, I don't give a shit what kind of legitimacy they think they have. It's still illegal for an adult to have sex with a child. Okay, so...
The difference is consent.
But what if a child consents to it?
Well, how old is the child?
What difference does the age make?
Because if... Fuck.
That's rhetorical. Okay.
Well, legally it makes a difference. Because of what? Until 16, you're not legally of sound mind to be making those kinds of adult decisions.
Yeah.
In Nevada, the consent age
5-year-old kindergarten, are you legally of sound mind to say, yeah, I'm going to go to a good news club and be taught what I'm taught there?
I would submit that it's a big distinction there between deciding whether or not to have sex and deciding whether or not to join a club. And again, the real issue there isn't whether or not, you know, the real issue in terms of the club is whether or not they're getting what they thought they were getting, what they were expecting. If they do get exactly what they were expecting, I don't see the problem.
Yeah, and on that note, can we just take a quick poll here? Can we just take a quick poll here for those in the panel and those in the chat? Does anybody have a problem? I guess, let me give my opinion first, and then you can tell me if you agree. If there is a Christian club that wants to come into a school so that interested kids with their parents' consent can come in for Bible education, learn Christian theology, memorize scripture, et cetera, I would be quite cool with that. Is there anyone who would think that shouldn't be permitted in public schools?
As long as a Muslim or pagan group gets to do the same thing, and it's not just exclusive to Christianity, I have no problem with that.
Same here. And I am a Christian. I believe that equality, period. So
no, I'm not suggesting there would be... No, hold on a sec. Hold on.
I may or may not have a problem with that, but I'm not sure if I have a problem with that. I do have a problem with this whole paradigm shift from equal access, which is what I am, to equal access to children. And that's what the Good News Club represents. The whole idea that adults can come in, and any group of any philosophy or ideological persuasion can come in because it's their constitutional free speech right, and they shouldn't be discriminated against on the basis of their ideology. So they can, any such group can come in and teach their ideology and try to win converts and proselytize in the public schools. That's not the purpose of public schools. I think that public schools ought to provide those rights for students themselves, because they're learning to express themselves, they're learning to become citizens, and to exercise their free speech rights. I just don't know why outsiders have to be able to come in to do that, because they want to have access to children.
Not to change the subject or anything, but you said that's not the purpose of public schools. What is the purpose of public schools?
To teach kids.
The purpose of public schools, go ahead.
To educate them.
Answer that.
To educate them. And then what does it mean to educate? To shield them from certain ideas that might be too much, or...
See, I think of it as this. If I understand, Hogg, are you speaking of a curriculum level or a extracurricular activity?
No, I don't mean administered by the school administrators or teachers or anything like that. I mean, it's a club, just like I remember my school had a badminton club, and yeah.
Then I absolutely
now, keep in mind, though, what I heard in response to that was, well, as long as this was, as long as there was sort of fairness and equality. Now, keep in mind, I'm not suggesting a scenario where the school is going to say, okay, well, we're going to have a Christian club, but that means we're also going to have an Islamic club, and we're also going to have a Jewish club, and we're going to have a Hindu club. That's not the issue. The issue is there's a request put to the school. We want Tuesday, Thursday evenings to be for this Christian club. There isn't going to be a guarantee that there's going to be an Islamic club next week. Does anybody have a difficulty with that? Is that a problem?
Not for me.
Well, I have difficulty with it if we're doing it in the elementary schools, because I don't consider that to be the purpose of public education. And I do connect, even though it's after the school, it's right after the school, and a lot of these parents are relying on the clubs to provide basically extra supervision for their children before they get home from work.
Only
and so this whole
wait. You said the purpose was teaching kids, education. Is that not a form of education?
Religion? Well, if you define education as, just loosely, sure, yeah, religion is a form of education. But
no. They're educating them
teaching
about
children doctrinal principles is not it's not secular education. It's not the kind of education that's going to unify us as a society. What we have here again and again, we have a paradigm where children are just there to be exploited by outsiders coming in and trying to access and recruit their little minds. And we're always talking about the adults' rights. And that's the only thing that we care about. That's the only thing so far that that the Supreme Court has cared about. People have not discussed the rights and the interests and the well-being of children. And I feel like I'm talking deaf here to almost to a deaf audience, a deaf cultural audience. Not you guys, but I'm just saying in general. I try to make this argument, and it falls on deaf ears. People don't care. It's just there's two right holders here. It's the government and it's adults, and the children don't have any rights, and nobody cares. That's what I get frustrated with.
I mean, I just don't know if I buy that argument. I don't know on what grounds you're actually saying that, and in what sense you mean rights. I mean, because you already did admit that they don't leave their constitutional rights at the school door.
And teaching them to feel terrible about themselves, feel worthless, feel like they have no value, and that they have to die. And this has been going on now for decades. And nobody cares about that. I shouldn't say nobody. I do feel very much alone on this. I get really irritated that the discussion always turns to the rights of the adults.
Yeah. Well, let me say, and I hope you respect this, that I am sympathetic to your position. I think you would find even in agreement in a lot of ways. I think our discussion so far has been sort of channeled along the kind of legal issues that are there, and for the kind of wistful, well, this is how we would want society to be. And we've kind of stayed away from the theological content. In a way, I think that's sort of consistent with the underlying issue here.
There's an echo.
I think there's, to some extent, I'm going to pause until Elizabeth speaks the mic. That's
Polymath,
incredibly
like your thing.
okay. It's funny, people do accuse me of liking to hear the sound of my own voice, but not echo in my own head.
Yeah, like in your head, you're like, I'm so awesome.
You're a legend in your own time, Hog.
Not when it's a 3/4 second delay. All it does is just make me stammer. Losing my point here. I think to some extent, like as we're sitting here trying, I mean, I'm just looking on the screen here. The six of us are sort of putting ourselves in the position of what if we could be the Grand Imperial Council of the United States or just the whole world? How would we craft society? And I think to some extent we adopt the Lying Ghost Show version of the lemon test. That for this discussion, we're trying to not adjudicate the truth claims about their theology. You know what? Maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we shouldn't let that kind of sit there.
Maybe there should have been some kind of like. I mean, I honestly, from my own opinion of the thing, it seems like it's bad for the school because you're supposed to separate church and state. You know, you can't have a kid going in school proselytizing and stuff during school hours, right? You could do that after hours, right?
If they do it before hours, that's fine. But
no, I'm saying during.
No,
they can't do that, right?
Yeah, but I don't. Well,
pray during hours, but not.
No, I'm not saying praying. I'm saying like you.
Yeah. And by the way, I apologize.
Actually, as long as they're not disruptive, they can do it even during school hours. You know, maybe in between classes. And they have a right. These are students. They have a right to do that.
That has to do more with the school's policy on those kind of situations. Legally, yes,
the courts look at it as a First Amendment issue.
Yeah. If you don't mind, let me try to be a little closer to what my point was going to be here, and actually it turns out to be a question for our guest here. That because you are obviously you're passionate about your concerns for their theology, can you sort of lay out for us what are you? Let me ask you this: are you concerned about their let's call it scare tactics? I know some Christians don't like when you use that term for it, but just for lack of a better term, this view of, look, you have to believe this and you have to believe this a certain way, or this is your fate. Plus, if you know other people who don't believe this way, then they have this awful fate and they're someone you need to avoid. And I apologize if you object to the term scare tactics, but and please someone else come up with a better label if you don't like that. But I just want to sort of clarify this issue. Is that sort of part of what your concern is that they use this sort of fearful future scare tactics?
Intimidation.
Was that? Oh, the question was for Emeka? Okay.
Great show, by the way.
Well, I personally don't care if they consent to it because, I mean, for me, it's just as absurd as telling this Sam Harris example, telling kids that if they don't study math and science, then after they die, they'll be tortured by 17 demons.
Wait, what?
I mean,
prime number. I like that.
17. It's a good number. But I mean, I don't care what even if they teach them that the Earth is flat. I mean, it doesn't matter to me.
Well, yeah. By the way, Sam Harris, I think, has got a great skill towards that. Just pointing out how silly something is. I think people remember his famous quote about if he believed if he prayed over cornflakes, then they would turn into the body of Elvis. That was
pancakes.
Pancakes. Thing. If you could, pancakes. That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and sorry, and the question was directed. So I'm looking at my participant list here. I forget your name. Who's the guest here? That's the lawyer. Who is that? Eric? Or, no, what's the name?
That's me, Eric. Yeah, I can answer your question.
I'm passionate about this concern. When you say that you're concerned for these children,
but it's actually very personal. I did not disclose this at the beginning, but the reason that I got involved in confronting the Good News Club was because this form of indoctrination that I got at the Good News Club, and honestly in many other venues as well within my evangelical upbringing, led me to become very melancholy and depressed at a young age, to the point where in my preteens, I attempted suicide.
Really?
And
Because of
yes.
wow.
Because of this kind of indoctrination. Yes, I was taught that I was such a sinner and that I did not deserve that I deserved death and things like that. Eventually that sunk in. And I tried to take my own life.
That theology, doesn't your suicide mean you're going to hell?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me. Why would you try to kill yourself if you actually believe this?
It pretty much
Oh
says
my
you're
gosh.
pretty much. From what I gather, it makes they say that.
Wow. What? That's honestly offensive for you to lob this abstract. Oh, well, this is illogical. You really do think that 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds have the same logical, critical thinking skills that you as an adult do? How can you be that detached from humanity? Maybe this is the way you were.
I didn't say anything like that. No.
But you did. You just said that doesn't make, so you're basically attacking my credibility.
No,
By saying,
actually,
well, that doesn't make any sense. Yes, you did.
First off, I phrased it in the form of a question. I said, if you believe that, doesn't that mean that you would go to hell? Okay, I guess your answer to that is that that's not how you thought it.
No, because
you didn't consider that as the consequence.
It's just that I
right?
to die. It's having this driven
tried to kill
in
yourself.
day
My
after
question
day after
One at a
day.
time, please.
Let me rephrase it, okay, since I offended you so much. My question is, didn't you think that by killing yourself you would go to hell? Or did you not think that?
Okay, Whit, actually, no. Let me interject for a second. Eric, Whit, can I just throw just a brief batch of cold water on this? Two quick things here. One, remember this is sort of mediated by a Skype call. So as soon as people start to talk over each other, what happens is the audience can't hear either person.
Yeah, that's why I said stop it, Whit. Yeah.
Yeah, so we need to show a bit of caution with that. Plus, just sort of for context, what happened here, and I sort of, I feel a little need to apologize to Eric to some extent. I want you to understand why I raised that issue, because sort of, toward an honest and candid discussion here of the breadth of the issues related to the Good News Club, I understand that you had, gone through difficulties, and I'm not being sort of minimizing or dismissive when I say that. I'm just, I apologize, I'm a bit of a dispassionate person at time, and I just can't find a better word for it. I'm simply asking you to be candid about your experiences when you describe this as a harmful group. And I'm not trying to invade your privacy when I say this. I'm just, I've asked a couple of these questions to kind of open the door for you to sort of, you've been speaking as a lawyer, and I'm just trying to open the door for you to sort of be candid about what motivates you here, and the reason I do that is because I think it's helpful to the audience to understand where your passion comes from, so that they can get as upset about this issue as I am, at least, and perhaps as upset as you are, because that's probably a good idea, because this is something that needs to be addressed. Having said that, given Eric's disclosure about these issues in his life, Whit, I would respectfully suggest that when somebody discloses something like that, it is not really prudent to sort of question the rationale behind their suicide, thoughts of suicidality or any attempts or something. So, and Eric, I want you to know too that I've known Whit for some time, and I can assure you there was nothing disrespectful.
Yeah, he didn't mean. I know Whit long enough too.
I'm not trying to. No, really, all I'm asking for is clarification to help me understand what it was that was behind your thinking of suicide. What was it explicitly that drove you to that?
Whit, he was like 5. He was like between the age of 5 and 12. Whit, this is like years ago.
Well, yeah, exactly. He said, yeah, exactly. And let me real quick say, you said it's 5th and 6th graders. I'm sorry, but I mean, it sounded like the thing you said about me denying developmental psychology. At 5th and 6th grade, I've been, I know. That's such a rudimentary, reasoning all I said was, I mean, at that age, I was a Christian, and I had the very same reasoning that if I killed myself, I thought I was going to go to hell. That's not, in other words, that's not beyond the bounds of a fifth grader to
Isn't that a
think
hasty
that's
generalization?
wrong, is all I'm saying. So I'm not denying developmental psychology.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's not all about reason. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, and that's why I don't think that Whit was trying to be disrespectful. I think what he was saying, in a way, he's making the point that are you not sort of theologically and psychologically and emotionally in a very weird, twisted, unjustifiable place? But Eric, I think that was your point. I think what you sort of were stepping up to and saying there was that you attribute you being at that weird, twisted, theologically unjustified place with the psychological difficulties. You would attribute a large part of that to the Good News Club. So I don't think Whit was sort of calling into question, your judgment. I think he was saying, I think he was acknowledging that you were crazy, but not in a...
Well, let me formally apologize if I offended.
One at a time, please. You guys are talking over each other.
I accept that, but let me clarify. It's not like I went from a Good News Club to wanting to take my life the same day or the next day. It's basically having this message of your inherent worthlessness drilled in, lesson after lesson, Sunday school after Sunday school, Good News Club group after Good News Club, and Christian school. And overall, just developing this real sense of I'm not a good person over time. And then when you start, with all of the other things it just kind of develops and morphs, and then one day you start thinking, I want to die. I want to die. I want to die. And I came to the realization that there was a connection between the Good News Club and this morbid self-hatred. Later, as an adult, when I started going through Good News Club materials that had been handed down to us, and I saw the very messages that I had internalized right there on paper. And I saw that connection and made that realization that, wow, this whole message that I had internalized and was repeating to myself under my breath, I want to die or I deserve to die, was exactly what they had told me.
Watch on the computer down there.
So it's not some kind of direct, immediate, logical step like a math equation that you solve the math equation. It's more of developing a very negative view of self.
Well, can I ask? Don't they also? I agree with all that or whatever. But didn't they also try to give you like the anecdote, so to speak, to that? Like, I mean, I agree that like a large part of Christian doctrine is the kind of like tearing you down, saying you're worthless, But then, like it's like Christopher Hitchens saying, they tell you you're born sick, but then they tell you they have the cure. Just accept Jesus, et cetera, be born again.
Right.
You didn't see that as any kind of helping? In other words.
Well, except that they keep reminding you of your sin, and they're feeding this idea that, if you go on sinning, you're not saved, because someone who goes on sinning someone who's saved wouldn't go on sinning, continue in sin. And so that kind of builds up, and you begin to, you're repenting all the time, you're always asking God to forgive you, and you're always feeling like a failure. Eventually, the repeated sense of failure becomes overwhelming, and the antidote no longer works.
Speaking... sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. In reference to Whit's point, I think every kid is different. For me, I was raised that way, but I was really interested in science. So I wasn't too immersed in it because I was just my thinking wasn't constrained to just like the Bible and things like that. See, like I'm an engineering student right now, so I was just always focused on that rather than just church and things like that. Church was just something that I did, but I never really devoted my life to it.
Well, and I can totally relate to the sense of fear he's talking about. But my sense of fear of hell, I mean, suicide was no way out of that, at least for me. You know, from what I was raised in, that was a immediate ticket to hell. So, I mean, as far as my reasoning faculties at that age, you know, it didn't. Again,
What
it's
age?
me.
What age?
Well, I could say broadly from the ages of like at least third grade to like probably up to high school almost is when I was still like totally a Christian and, you know, believed in hell and rejected evolution, etc.
You think in third grade you understood all that?
Yeah.
I think in
Well,
second
I mean,
grade
you still have that fear.
I think it's,
There's this really cool video that you can. I'll post it right now. It talks about how it doesn't make sense anymore that there's an afterlife. If you want to look, check it out. I just posted it in the chat.
If I may, would you like an actual Christian's perspective?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sure. My view of it is this: is, you know, it's unfortunate that those who had a bad experience with religion, that it's made you see it the way that you see it. Because I was raised knowing about hell, but not being threatened by hell. And all this stuff that you guys have been saying, I know a lot of people that have been raised the same way I was. So to say that the idea that Christians, and saying that, instead of saying some Christians believe this way, instead of saying that, you're making it sound like, at least to me, that all Christians are taught this way. And
well, I mean,
to be honest with you,
yeah.
I have never been taught to fear God.
Well,
So,
I mean,
and I don't raise my kids the same way that you guys were treated. You know, I mean, that's why I have two atheist sons, or two atheist children and two Christian children of their own accord, because I've given them both sides of the information and let them choose.
But sure, but in fairness, Donnie, I got to say, I haven't heard anyone here say, like, this is what Christians do. I think what we've been discussing is sort of the specific concept of the Good News Club. And I mean, honestly, if there was going to be like the Donnie, News Club, and you wanted to go and teach kids about your view of the world, I would happily support that. I think everybody here, I'm sure most of the people here would. But I think we've been very careful to be sharply focused on concerns of the conduct of the Good News Club, and we're only now sort of touching on the theology. And I don't think we would be painting all Christians with a broad brush. I mean, I accept that you're sort of cautioning us that we shouldn't do that, but I hope you see that for the most part we're not.
Well, another thing. Okay.
I'm not saying that you guys are. I'm just saying, at least you would get more. And I think this about most of the atheist people that are outspoken about their feelings on religion. I think there would be more engagement with Christians if they didn't make it sound like that, and they do. I mean, I can rattle off tons of YouTubers that make it as if all Christians are the same. I mean, that's why I stopped watching their videos, because they went from being educational to being not educational.
Well, the problem...
and actually, in case, Don, then I completely agree with you. I take your point, and I completely agree with you. I think one of the things that's going to hurt us in this discussion, like if we're discussing raising public awareness about Good News Clubs and kind of embarking on a campaign to sort of keep our schools clean of that sort of nonsense, then we are on a losing mission if we're going to do that in a fashion that alienates mainstream Christians. If we want to make this an us versus them thing, we lose.
Yeah, but can I say something? They
Go ahead.
are, they're focusing on they're following the Bible to the T. They're doing it right. So you can't say that they're doing anything wrong in raising you like that. They're being biblically correct.
Well,
Let me
wanna
jump
add
on
to
that because I've been waiting for that point to come up. I apologize, but I've been waiting for that point to come up because that's a very interesting one, and that's why I raised the issue of scare tactics before, because they do have a sound biblical foundation when they use the scare tactics. And what if there's a group out there that's trying to educate about the dangers of the future? So, for example, and the thing is, they do. Like, if you look at sex ed, you go in any middle school, and they tell you, oh, if you do this bad thing or that bad thing, you might get herpes. You know, like we say things to scare people. But usually, when we apply scare tactics to kids, it's because we have a solid, logical, evidence-based foundation to tell them that those are the consequences of their actions. So that's, I think, where the theology, even though we can say, well, we're going to apply the Lemon test and we're not going to try to adjudicate factual claims of their theology, it ends up becoming an issue because we're not entirely opposed to scare tactics. We think it's great to scare children. It's important. It's the only thing that keeps them from doing stupid stuff. But here we've got a group of people that scares them with something for which there is no evidence.
Like the 17 demons. Like the 17 demons that also.
Let me touch on two things Donald said. The first, I don't have like the numbers to back me up on this, but I mean, just based on my own experience, and it seems like it's a growing phenomenon that the actual mainstream Christians view is at least moving more in the direction of like getting rid of the whole idea of hell altogether. And so if you want to talk about the majority of Christians, I think that's probably the more accurate description anyways. And on his the question I would want to pose to the group, because Donald mentioned it, I think it's an interesting question, atheists and theists alike. The question would be, if you have kids, or even if you don't, the question would still be, when you have kids, do you think you have a certain obligation to at least educate them about religion? Not to tell them, or I guess I'll just leave it open. The question is, to what extent should you educate your kids about religion?
To the extent that I read them bedtime stories. I would read them bedtime stories.
You don't fear that. So let me put it this way.
I'm just afraid.
If your 9-year-old child asked you straight out whether God is real, what would your answer be?
I would say I don't think so, but you can find out by yourself. But I don't want them to become like, I'm sure you guys know about Venom Fangak's story, right? Like how he wasn't raised particularly religious, but now he loves Kent Hovind, right?
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't, that would be my biggest fear, just not exposing them to this stuff, and then they just find something on the internet like Kent Hovind.
If I may, I'd like to respond to that question.
With retrospect,
from the retrospect of being a Christian, raising 4 children, one from the ranges of 22 now to 14. When they asked us about God, we told them, and I quote when I say this, we would love for you to believe in God if you choose to, but here are the facts that we know. And these are what we were raised on. But here's the world's view of Christianity. And this is what they believe. And this is what their thoughts are. And if you choose to still want to believe in God, that is your choice. If you do not choose, that's fine as well. But don't ever question me on how I feel about God. Because you don't have the right to question me
isn't a choice.
About my faith.
Well, wait, to follow up on that, though, since you're the only theist, I think, I don't know about Allison, but as far as I know, you're the only theist in here, so this is interesting. To follow up on that, would you also teach them about other religions, though? Not that other religions aren't true, but just that there are these other religions.
Absolutely, and I have.
Yeah, if nothing else, than what Emeka said, to at least so that they're not caught off guard when they finally are exposed to.
Let me expand on that a little bit, if I may. one of the things that I did when I turned 18 years old and moved out of my parents' house and started living my life as the life I've led, one of the things that I did do as a social study, not as a academia study, because I never went to college except for certificates. So my life experience is where I value my education, because real life will teach you more, in my opinion, than school will, because you get to interact with a lot of different people. I've actually gone, when I was living in Florida, was the first time I ever experienced Scientology. And I seriously, for about a month, sat and communicated with one of their main guys that he was trying to convert me, and I told him, you can't convert me, but I am interested in what you guys believe in, just so I can have that knowledge. And for that month, I was shaking my head because it was against the way I was raised. But I wasn't shaking my head as in to say, well, you're not valid. You have your points. Yeah, I may think in my mind I'm thinking this. I may think you're a whack job, but it's interesting. It's very interesting on way people perceive their religions. There's a woman here on Vaughn who followed me from Blog TV. When she started on Vaughn, her and I actually had one-on-one conversations about her Muslim faith or her Islam faith. And I asked her questions, because you never learn unless you ask questions. And when my kids come to me asking me about Islam, about Scientology, about Presbyterian, the difference between Catholicism and Presbyterian, I only tell them when I start, this is all I know. If you want to know more, please go find out yourself. Learn on your own for stuff that I can't tell you about. And the same goes with science. My wife and I are 100% behind science. We believe that science is around us 24/7. So we're not one of those type of Christians that will deny our children's health, go into a doctor because it's not God. God's not going to heal her right then and there. We have to have the doctors heal her. I mean, I've been to I just got out of the hospital last week. I'm not one of those type of people that deny science, because science is around us all the time. So I teach my kids that the information that is presented to you, question it. See if that fits into your life. If it doesn't, then you need to evaluate where your life sits. So when it comes to teaching my kids about other religions, I've taught them about Buddhism, told them about Taoism. I've taught them about, and only as much as I know. I mean, and I tell them, when you want to know more about it, search it out for yourself. I mean, you're going to have to find out from those people, because I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not a Catholic. I'm not a Presbyterian or Baptist or any of those kind of different. Even though I was baptized Southern Baptist, that doesn't mean I live my life as a Southern Baptist, because I'm not 90 years old. You know, so when it comes,
commendable. I think that's all really commendable. That, I mean, especially for a Christian, or any religious person to say that, because most religions tell you have to convert your kids. Like that's one of a parent's obligations. I mean, yeah. So I think that's.
I know it says, and that's where a lot of people don't believe that I'm a Christian, because of the fact that I don't look at the Bible as a literal sense. I look at it as a learning tool. A lot of people don't see that, because they're too dwelled on the negative in the Bible. That not you guys, but the ones that I've interacted with. They want to say, well, how can you be a Christian and not follow the Bible to its letter? Well, that's because I don't. I live my life the way I live my life. I don't sit there and go preach to people who don't believe in God. I don't preach. I don't proselytize at all, because it's I know you've heard this before, but it is a personal thing. My life, my decisions I make in my life do not revolve around the Bible, because if it did, we'd still be 2,000 years ago technologically. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that we're 2,000 years ago. We're in the now. There's a lot of things that are in the Bible that I don't agree with. like 900-year-old men, snakes that talk. See, I look at the snake as a symbolism, not as a...
And on that
and the whole thing about... Yes.
Oh, I thought you were finished. There's a lag.
The problem with...
But on that note, we have to do final statements.
Okay, I'll start. Since I was the last one in, I'll be the first one out. You know, our problem here is that, you know, the good news program, you know, the good news organization that wants to come into schools and teach the brimstone and fire. And as a Christian, I may not be a fundamental Christian, but I don't believe that they need to come in and do brimstone and fire. But if their program was not so brimstone and fire-ish, I don't have a problem with it, because they have other organizations in the schools or that come into the schools that may disagree with the way I look at things. So if the schools are going to allow one group, they should allow another. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Thank you.
Okay. Ali Sun. She's still there?
What? You still can't pronounce my name, and Sue, I'm not saying anything.
Okay, that was easy.
Allison. It's Allison.
Polymath?
Well, it was nice talking to you guys. So, that's pretty much it.
Anybody want a last chance at my question, Allison or Hogtie?
What question was that?
Well, to what extent, as a parent, I think, especially atheists, what obligation do you have to teach your kids about religion? I mean, I would say you do if for no other reason than, like I said, or as someone else I think Emeka, you know, that because they are going to be exposed to it eventually, and it's better that you prepare the ground for them so that they're not caught off guard and get lured into some one charlatan over any other.
Kent Hovind?
Yeah, I could say it's a great discussion. It's a really, really interesting topic, and I don't necessarily want to even open that can of worms right now, but to say, I wonder, were you there for the discussion? We had an after show that we had gone into this discussion, and I had even used the same example you brought up, or was it you that brought up, of Venom Fang X? And here's a guy that didn't have any religious exposure, who then when he got some, it was just like a virus that messed up his brain. Yeah. And we were discussing in an after show, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, and it was really a good discussion about how to inoculate kids against the religious lunacy. Again, not all religion, but against the particularly sort of damaging things. So all I would say in response to your question is copy paste from our 90-minute discussion on this topic 2 weeks ago.
Well, what would you say to your kid if he asked you if God was real? What would your answer be?
Well, he's 3, so I'd probably, you know.
Oh,
what are you gonna
let's
do?
say he's like.
No,
let's say he's like 9.
I guess. I mean, what I would suggest is that we do sort of our closing statements, and then maybe this is a good after-show topic.
I just felt like he was making closing statements. So
yeah.
I was trying to.
Well, I did have one good news thing, especially while Eric is still with us, and I appreciate his time and what. Let me answer real quick on the kid issue. Is that especially at young ages and even up to 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, I would say I wouldn't even answer the question. I would find a way to avoid it because I want to know what my kid thinks. I would say, well, you tell me what's God like, you know, and what do you think about God, and how does that make you feel? And I would want to know. It's pretty easy to dodge a kid's question, and I would do it not because I'm uncomfortable telling kids what I believe, but because on that issue, I think I feel more a responsibility to sort of shepherd along his critical thinking skills and his emotional development more than I feel any sort of interest in shepherding atheism. Again, great after-show topic.
Also, Eric, final statement. You got 10 seconds, practically.
Okay. Please go to intrinsicdignity.com for more information about child protection provisions for facility use policies.
Wow, you're cutting it out just like The guy on The Price is Right.
Bob Barker?
Yeah, Bob Barker. Don't forget to spay and neuter your pets. For more, go to, so,
You know what?
we're
Even
gonna
if the whole fire and brimstone stuff were true, which
okay, thank you for watching. We'll be back in 10 minutes for the after show. And also, we finally hit 400 subscriptions, so thank you to the viewers for watching. And wait 5 seconds.
Ah.